Welcome back to From the Belly. I'm Doug Wheeler. This is my podcast. Every episode we've done has had its own unique value. I feel like this is maybe the most important interview I've ever done. Carolyn and I were just talking before I hit the record button, and she had a question for me, and before I answered it, I thought, why don't you ask me that while we're recording? So we're just going to switch things up. I'm going to have Carolyn ask me that question.
Sure. Yeah, Doug. So I love it when I get invitations for podcasts, but I have not heard your name before. I wasn't familiar with you, and you mentioned something about a spiritual director of yours suggesting that you reach out to me. So I'm curious about all that. How did that happen? I love it that you invited me. Here I am.
It's fantastic. Probably 2.5 months ago, I decided I want to go back into spiritual direction as one who's being directed. I was in a new area. I reached out to a few people. It was crickets on the other end. I reached out to Mark L. at the Franciscan Spiritual Center outside of Portland. It was in my third session with Mark that he said, Doug, in listening to you, there's an important book. There's 2 books that I want to recommend. The second one, take it or leave it. The first one, in his own gracious and kind way, he was saying, this is a must read, because he was listening to me and knowing I need direction. So the book is Savage Grace. So that's how I got acquainted with you, Carolyn. And I looked at you and your bio, and I looked at Andrew's. And for some reason, I just felt drawn, and I would have reached out to Andrew, but I felt drawn to reach out to you. And just like, I want to talk to Carolyn, and you said yes. So that's how all this came to be.
Okay, great. Thank you for that.
Oh, yeah. Thank you for asking. Carolyn, there's 2 things I wanted to do to kind of set the table for our time today. And maybe you and I will decide that we enjoyed this so much, we'll do a second parter.
Sounds good.
I wanted to read something from a book that I'm currently reading, The Divine Feminine, from Rabbi Rami Shapiro. I want to read a piece of that, very short. And then I'm going to ask something I'm going to ask this now. I would love to hold a minute of silence, you and I together, for the LA fire crisis. I know, I'm sure your heart aches like mine does for the damage, but also I know you're a woman of the earth. This is terrible stuff, but we can also talk about what's going on in our environment and about global warming. So I think what I'll do is to lead us into that minute of silence that we hold together. I'll just do this very short reading from the Divine Feminine, and we'll hold silence for a minute, and then we'll launch into your work and what you're about. Is that a good direction forward?
Sounds good to me.
Thank you, Carolyn. This is from Proverbs 1:24 through 33. If you hate knowledge and spurn wisdom, if you reject my counsel and refuse my direction, you have nothing but the bitter fruit of your own desires, the barren hope of your own schemes. Your recklessness will kill you. Your desires will strangle you. Listen to me, and my words will protect you. Heed me, and you can face your strongest desires with calm. That's Proverbs 1:24 through 33. Thanks for holding a minute of silence together, Carolyn. Carolyn, thank you.
Thank you.
I have Dr. Carolyn Baker with us today. Carolyn's a former psychotherapist and professor of psychology and history. Carolyn offers life and leadership coaching as well as spiritual counseling for people who want to live more resiliently in the present as they prepare for the future. Carolyn has authored such books as Dark Gold, Love in the Age of Ecological Apocalypse, Return to Joy, Savage Grace, Saving Animals from Ourselves, Collapsing Consciously, Navigating the Coming Chaos, Sacred Demise, Radical Regeneration, and Confronting Christofascism. And there's probably more, but at least that's a good start to let you know that we're talking to a woman who's done her work. Carolyn, before we launch into this morning's conversation, let me ask you, where were you born and raised, i.e. formed?
I was born in Elkhart, Indiana, which is the buckle of the Bible Belt. It's in far north Indiana, 5 miles from the Michigan border. I was an only child, and I was born into a family of parents who were extremely right-wing evangelicals.
You wrote somewhere it's your upbringing as a fundamentalist Christian.
Yes.
What was that like for a young girl, an only child at that time? And then give us some touch points of how you formed out of that.
Well, it was very fear-based, and I always felt protected by my parents. They gave me wonderful custodial care. It was mostly everything was about fear and doing the right thing and not disobeying Jesus or disobeying the Bible. My first reading actually was, I learned to read well before I went to first grade, but I started to cut my teeth in reading in the Bible and memorized a lot of portions of the Bible. And that was all well and good until adolescence, when I became, I realized that I was attracted to females, not males, and then struggled for many, many years after that with my sexual orientation because it was not easy to come out and be who I was. I enrolled in Moody Bible Institute and was there for 2 years until I got kicked out for being gay. And then I went on to Big Ten University, got my degree there, and just grew away from, was formed out of the religious training that I had received as a child. Not without some crises, not without some deep soul searching and a lot of pain, but I'm happy to say that I got out of that trajectory and into another one that was much more about being a human, about being vulnerable, and about realizing eventually that I was not separate from the divine, that in fact, I was part of the divine. I was inextricably connected to the divine. It took a long time for me to understand that. And today, that's pretty much my spiritual path, is honoring that connection that I have with the sacred and with all people and all things.
Karen, how old were you when you were kicked out of Moody?
20.
What was the first 6 months like after that?
Was really turbulent because, I left there and I moved to a suburb north and I got a part-time job. And it was the first, it was like an initiatory experience. It was my first venture out on my own. And my parents wanted me to come home and they were going to fix me. And I said, no, I'm not going with you. I'm staying here in Chicago. I'm getting a job. I'm becoming an adult. I didn't actually use those words, but that's what was going on for me. And it was very hard. There was some guilt. There was fear about what am I going to do with my life. I had applied to Michigan State and got accepted, so I knew I was going there. But it was hard, and I was really trying to, it's not like I just rejected Christianity, all at once. It was like, well, I'd like to find a more liberal Christianity. And so I began to read some of the theologians and go more deeply into the history of Christianity. And yet there was this, yeah, but it's still not okay to be gay. So, how do I have a deep spirituality? And, I got to get rid of that gay stuff. So I tried in many ways to become straight, which was an epic failure. But there I was, and then when I got to college, real college, I learned so much, as you do in a great university. And then I began to struggle with agnosticism, atheism. And I got very involved with the student movement of the 60s, protests against the Vietnam War, began to experiment a little bit with psychedelics. And, my mind just expanded enormously because there was a whole universe that I was not in touch with and never could be as a child. So that's part of the journey. And you're asking about the first months after being kicked out, and that's how it was. It was difficult, but liberating.
But liberating.
Yeah. Yeah.
Is it fair to say that Moody gifted you with You Must Leave?
Absolutely.
Is that the way you've come to see that?
Oh, absolutely. You bet.
Carolyn, how do you make sense of, there's another young woman out there who experienced something similar, and she went back home, and she went even maybe deeper into the tradition, but you didn't. How have you made sense out of what was given you or provided for you? What was the catalyst or the trajectory to have you go, no, I'm not coming home? How do you make sense out of that? Because we see that pull, that strong, strong pull to come back home.
I had low self-esteem, but I had enough self-esteem to say no, because I had also fallen in love with Chicago. I had fallen in love with being in a city, not some bumpkin place in northern Indiana. I had fallen in love with all that a city offers. The excitement, the learning, the arts. And it was like, I want to stay here. This is who I am. And amazingly, and I can't fully explain it myself, amazingly, I was able to stand my ground and say, no,
Yeah,
this is my life now, even though I didn't quite have words for that.
Right, sure. You got
and
the words later.
Yeah. And it's really a miracle. It's really a gift. I think it was a divine intervention on some level because a lot of people could not have done that.
That's right.
And I work all the time in my coaching practice with survivors of religious trauma. And, I see often how hard it is for people to really be able to extricate from those chains, those mental and emotional chains.
I was just having a conversation with my wife, Lori, this morning, just in preparation of my time with you. Lori grew up in fundamentalism, and she said, I don't think Lori would mind me asking this on her behalf. She said, I hope you all talk about just the vice grip that conditioning has. And I know her story well. She still has echoes of that.
Oh, yes. Oh, yes.
Can you talk about that for a moment, about how this lives like in the body of a human being, conditioned in fundamentalism, and what it takes? What's the ongoing take of being able to get the medicine to cleanse yourself from that?
Well, the bottom line, of course, is you're a sinner. And it doesn't matter if you were born again. It doesn't matter how good you behave, how well you behave, I should say, how many good works and acts of kindness you do, how many people you bring to Jesus. Doesn't matter. You're still a sinner and you're still going to need God's forgiveness on a daily basis. And you can't really do anything on your own. It's all about depending on Jesus. And so there's this inherent low self-esteem. There's a Christian hymn you're probably familiar with called At the Cross. And one of the lines is, alas, and did my Savior bleed for such a worm as I? Worm, I'm a worm. And so, no matter how much you educate yourself or liberate yourself from that kind of thinking, there's still a little piece down in your psyche that, the data has been entered in a way that's kind of permanent, and it kind of comes back up every once in a while. Doesn't come up that often for me, but sometimes. And it's very shame based. And so, the shame comes around once in a while. And I know, well, that's because I was taught I was a worm, and so I'm able to move on from that today. But there's still a little piece of that that's there in anyone who's been raised in evangelical Christianity.
And we're going to get to more current topics. Well, that's a current topic, but we're going to talk about your book, Christofascism, because I'm I'm fascinated by that. And you had said in an email to me as we were getting to know each other, hey, Doug, I sense this is one you'll probably want to read. And of course, you talked about Frank Schaeffer writing the foreword to that. And I interviewed Frank, just like you and I are talking,
Right.
goodness,
Right.
3 or 4 years ago.
Yeah.
Given that so much of what you and Andrew Harvey forecasted in Savage Grace, the book I spoke about earlier, has happened or is happening, how are you coping with that reality?
Yeah. So one of the things that I have done in recent weeks, actually, is I've pulled back a great deal from watching the news. I still watch a little of it each day just to keep current. But for 15 years, I produced a daily news digest that covered economic, environmental, world news, down through all of the topics. And on Sundays, I published a Sunday post, which was an article of inspiration by someone or a video of inspiration. But I did that for 15 years, and that forced me to be very current on a daily basis with the news. And now I gave that up to December 31st, 2024. And now it's like I'm not publishing any news, so I don't need to be into it as much, although I do like to know what's going on. But I've pulled way back and pulled way back in terms of my expectations. And what I'm realizing is that we are now in a full blown polycrisis or meta crisis in which all of the issues that we are facing as a species are related to each other. And that makes dealing with any one of them more difficult because they're all intertwined. So we cannot face these things head on as individuals or even as political parties. It's too big and it's too late on so many levels. And so what I believe, and I sent you a little piece on emergence coaching,
Yes.
which is what I'm doing these days. There's lots of kinds of coaching, life coaching, business coaching, leadership coaching, but I'm focusing on what do we do personally and as a community in the face of this poly crisis, which is only going to get worse. Well, number one is to realize I can't deal with this alone. I've got to be able to have people that I can talk with about this. And that might be a community that I help to form or join. And a little later, we can talk about a community that I've been part of forming in the last 2 years here locally. But I also might want to go deeper as I struggle with this fear, as I struggle with this grief and this anger about what's going on. I may want to reach out to a coach like myself and view this crisis as an engraved invitation from my deeper self to go deeper into that self and heal some of the wounds in myself that has caused me to co-create this terrible tragedy and allow that polycrisis to bring out of me the things that need healing and also the joys that I have not experienced as a result of grieving. Grief and joy travel together and need each other. Andrew and I wrote a whole book called Return to Joy, which we can talk about if you want. In the face of this polycrisis, I cannot be alone. I have to have people to talk about it with. I may want to seek a coach, and I may want to be part of creating a community where we can meet on a regular basis, support each other emotionally and spiritually, maybe even talk specifically about preparations logistically, and know that I have a tribe, a family, if you will, that I can navigate this crisis with. So these are some of the blessings in this horrible tragedy that we absolutely need. It does not serve us to keep putting our heads in the sand and saying, well, somebody else will solve all these problems.
Carolyn, you had said it's a little too late or it's too late. And maybe you've already addressed this in what you just shared. What's it too late for?
It is too late to save the planet. It may be too late. In fact, I assume it's too late to save our species. I think we've passed the point of no return a long time ago. And we keep looking for tipping points, and we're already there. We've already passed many of those. It's too late for scientific materialism to solve our problems. It's too late for us to think that we can do any of this on our own. It's time to become students of the universe, students of Earth, and students of the higher self that lives within all of us.
Is there a danger in somebody interpreting what you just said to the point of, as you said, there's no return, that the despair will set in, some fatalism, nihilism,
Sure.
let's say, and just like
Absolutely.
that?
That's why I'm doing the coaching that I'm doing, because people need to have a different kind of life than just doom and gloom. I'm just finishing up right now on Brian McLaren's wonderful book, Life After Doom.
Yeah, I saw that.
Yeah. And also my own book, Undaunted, Living Fiercely into Climate Chaos in an Authoritarian World. Now we need to focus on how we live and how we can live without despair. We will have sadness, we will feel grief, we'll feel all kinds of emotions. But how do we live without giving up and finding a new meaning and purpose in life as we go deeper within ourselves and do this inner work and then create community with each other?
What's coming to my mind, and tell me if this is a good outcome of what you're sharing, and that is that somehow it's actually, I guess it's a form of freedom, but it's also a death of expectation. But to think that I can do something, or a group can do something to flip this quickly, what I hear you saying is, oh no.
No. There is lots of stuff I can do. There's lots of stuff a group or community can do to make a difference, short term or, in a smaller scale.
Yeah, right.
We've got to really diminish our scale of thinking. Because we've been trained in this culture that in order to make a difference, we have to do something big or we have to be part of a mass movement. A wonderful mentor on the collapse of industrial civilization is Meg Wheatley. And I don't know if you've ever had her on your
I have
podcast.
not.
I highly invite you to invite Meg Wheatley. She's written many books, but she wrote one called Who Do We Want to Be?
Do you know Meg?
I do. Yeah.
Well, how about if we do this? How about down the road, whatever that means, I'll have both of you on.
Okay, that would be awesome
Great.
because she loves my work and
Great.
I adore her work, and that
Love
would
it.
be a beautiful connection.
We'll do it.
Yeah. So anyway, she has a Buddhist background, and it's all about following the bodhisattva path, the path of service, and to see what I can do right here, right now, and forget the big expectations and forget focusing on the outcome, but doing what's in front of me because it's the right thing to do and because it fulfills me and it somehow serves others. It serves the earth, it serves people, it serves animals, and it's the right thing to do and it's there in front of me. And stop thinking that it has to be big and dramatic and flashy.
And that's so much of what we're trying to resist, right? I have 4 questions that I think they live together. I've got a few other questions I want to make sure that we get to. Maybe we could, you and I have been sitting at a table, and I imagine we're going to go sit at a smaller table for a moment.
Okay.
And I'm going to invite you into that concept of just riffing on something. And you've been doing that anyways. You've just been sharing from your mind and your heart.
Right.
Let's riff on this for a minute.
Sure.
It's a 4-parter. Carolyn, what does it mean to be here?
Yeah, what does it mean to be present? And this is one of the things I help people with in coaching and, in groups that I'm involved with, is simply, this is a body. You have this body, and you have been taught in industrial civilization, you've been educated to be away from that body, starting with the neck up. You've been taught that all connection and all resolution to problems is up here in your head. And if you just think about it and strategize, you can figure it out. What you have been dissociated from is your body. And so I often invite people to just sit quietly and, allow the energy in their head to just come down in their body and check in with what they feel. Where's the energy right now? Are you feeling some kind of tingling in your chest area, or is there something going on in you feel your legs wanting to move? Whatever it is, what body sensations do you feel? And then listening to those, what kind of pictures or images might you see as a result of sitting with that? Or what kind of other emotions come up for you? Maybe it's tears, maybe it's rage, who knows? But this is an exercise that I help people with, to be present in the body. And if you're present in the body, you're here now. There's no way you cannot be here now if you're really present in the body.
Is it true, Carolyn, that one has to experience some form of what you're talking about to really feel it and understand it? You don't study your way to it. I mean, you might know some of the touch points of the map.
Sure.
But as you're talking, I'm feeling more here.
Good.
I'm also hearing the voice that conditioned me. And here's the voice. It was the literal thing that was said to me. Do something, Douglas. Just do something.
Right.
It pulls me out of being here.
Yeah, don't just sit there and feel.
Oh, yeah. Because that's so small and in some ways so useless. Be useful.
Yes.
Of course, that came out of predominantly my mother, who was born in 25, and my father was born in 15. And I know what the conditions were for that. But that was I could hear that as you were talking.
Yes.
As I was dropping in, which I'm accustomed to doing, but I hear the echo. That was my fundamentalism, by the way. I didn't grow up in Christian fundamentalism. My wife said, "So you attended church, right?" I said, "Yeah, we attended church." And I said to her in the midst of that early conversation when we were dating, I said, I think she must have asked me, I don't remember the literal question, but were you afraid? As if her assumption was everybody's afraid in church. And I said, I never was afraid. And I mean, I can still remember the look on her face like, excuse me, you can be inside of a church and not be afraid.
Right.
But I had another form of fundamentalism. Do something, Douglas.
Yeah.
The second question. What will it require to stay here if here is the place you speak of?
It will require lots of support, and that may be through the community that we build with each other, and having a place to talk about the collapse of industrial civilization, the growing poly crisis. We cannot do this alone. And then it may require going deeper and doing more inner work in a situation like coaching. But is absolutely impossible to navigate this on our own.
Okay, so this is not a passive act. This is an active act.
This is very active, and if you want to do something, start there.
Stay here.
Yeah.
The third question. What will likely happen if we leave here, if we don't stay in the space you're speaking of and cultivate that with others?
We will most likely then go up into our heads and try to figure this out from the neck up, which has never worked and certainly cannot work now. And we'll feel isolated and alone and fearful. And then we just likely will spiral down emotionally into deep despair. And, when we go into places like that, we often don't want to even be alive. And that can lead to suicidal thoughts and maybe taking action to end our lives.
And I'm also thinking if that's happening individually, is it true to say that a person is susceptible then to all of a sudden joins some form of a progressive army that's going to flip this thing?
Right.
We're going to fight back, but it's that fighting of violence.
Exactly. And also then on the flip side, for folks on the right, they are there because of deep despair and deep disappointment and not being able to deal with feelings, and the fact that they have been historically so shafted by our capitalist government, and so many promises made to them that were not fulfilled. And so I believe that the political violence that we're seeing right now, the stochastic terrorism, is a result of that deep despair.
And just like domestic violence, which I've worked in that sector, even when a victim starts to realize what's happening to him or her, often her, but even him, but boy, the pull to stay in the system, right? Yeah, to not stay true to even the knowledge that's coming. but find a way to separate out from that because you stay intact with what you know.
Exactly.
And then your fear drives it even more. The fourth question, what will likely happen if we stay here?
First of all, you're going to feel a lot of feelings, and you're going to need support for feeling those feelings. The one that comes to mind, which is very, very common, is grief. You look around you and you see your planet destroyed. You see the extinction of species. You see cultural decline. And you see, that when I think, I can't remember what the percentage is, but there's a very large percentage of Americans who can only read at the sixth grade level. So you see this decline and you see this, replacement of community with social media, which is in so many ways destructive. And so if you don't stay present, the feelings will become overwhelming and you'll find some way to bypass them. It may be through addictions. It may be through religion. It may be through violence, but the feelings will become unbearable if you stay present, which is why people don't. And you need support and guidance in how to manage those feelings and how to utilize those feelings for growth and actually to experience more sense of joy and connection.
Some really wonderful work you did there, working through that four-parter. Be here, stay here. What happens if we leave here? What happens if we stay here? Thank you, Carolyn.
Yes, you're welcome.
I noticed in listening to some of your interviews and reading some of your material and even talking with you today, one of the words that kept showing up was predicament. Our predicament.
Yep.
You want to say anything about
Absolutely. It is not working for us to view everything that's going on in the world and in terms of our planet as problems. Problems can be solved. We can intellectually analyze them and figure out how to deal with them and maybe even solve them. We are dealing with many situations now that are not solvable. They're predicaments. And the only thing we can do with the predicament is respond to it because we can't solve it. And so that is how I view climate chaos. We can respond in a variety of ways and we can do some mitigation and prevention, but we can't solve the problem. It's too big and too advanced at this point to be solved.
I'm thinking about the book Savage Grace that introduced me to you. Can you talk about, let's see if I can do this where everybody can see it. Yeah.
Beautiful. Yeah.
Can you talk about the cover illustration?
Sure.
And how the two of you chose that? And did any publisher or anybody push back and go, that's a little too drastic?
Sure. I'll talk about how we came to write that book. We wrote that book, and I'll talk about the cover as well. We wrote that book in the beginning of 2017 after Trump got elected the first time. And so it was between the election and the inauguration. And we, based on what we knew about Trump and based on what we knew about our global predicament, we forecasted some stuff in there about what was coming. And we were pretty much right. And both of us are very tuned in to mythology and the lessons that mythology has to teach us, the lessons from other traditions and where they got those myths and stories in their tradition. So we were thinking about the Hindu goddess Kali, who, among other things, devours her own children. She has a light side and a dark side. There's a nurturing side of Kali that's very beautiful, but there's a dark side of Kali when people do not listen to her, when people do not, in fact, be present as you're talking about, and when people begin to destroy what is around them. Kali deals with them very seriously. She devours them. In the mythology, she has a necklace around her neck that is made of the skulls of the children she's devoured. And so we were saying, okay, looks like it's time for Kali to come out of her cave and raise holy hell. And so we wanted to put Kali on the cover. And I'm not remembering exactly which version of Kali we put on, where we got that illustration, but our publisher said, great,
Oh, wow.
And same with my book, Confronting Christofascism. My publisher designed the cover.
Okay.
And it's a pretty amazing cover.
That's an amazing. There's other words we can use with
Right.
amazing. That's an
Hellacious,
amazing.
maybe.
Yeah. You tell me when you're ready to catapult over to Christofascism, the book, and we'll talk about that.
Anytime.
Anything else about Savage Grace? So when you were writing the intro, well, Matthew Fox, who's one of my favorites, wrote the intro,
Right.
forward, which is beautiful. If you were to go back to that and read where you were at that time and transport back, which was 6-7 years ago, and now the Carolyn who sits with, we were pretty much right. How do you make sense out of those two Carolyns, if you will?
Well, part of being a human being and being an author is you're vulnerable, you're limited, you don't know everything. And so when we wrote that book, we could never have imagined that Trump would then be defeated and, we'd have 4 years of something different and then that he would come back. We could not have imagined that the dragon in the cave would peer its ugly head out again and win. But we did. And I wanted to mention that Savage Grace is part of a collection that Andrew Harvey and I did that is composed of 4 books. It's called Radical Regeneration, Sacred Activism, and the Renewal of the World by Andrew and I. It consists of our first book together, Return to Joy. It consists of Savage Grace. The 4th book is a separate volume that we wrote together, just called Radical Regeneration. And so we went to our publisher and said, we'd like to put these 4 books. Oh, I know, the 3rd book, if you look at what's behind me, Saving Animals from Ourselves. So we put those 4 books together in one volume, Radical Regeneration. So if you buy this book, you get all 4.
Wow, right on. What's it like to work with Andrew?
Oh, it's a delight. It's a delight. And, gay man, gay woman, some people said, well, you guys are going to have a controversy, because you're both strong personalities and very bright people. And it was absolutely not that way. It was so harmonious. And we had fun doing this. Yes, we had deep emotions and felt a lot of grief, but we also, we were very committed to, we're going to work really hard and then we're going to go play. Let's spend a day working on this manuscript and then let's go to the symphony, or let's work really hard and then we go out to a delicious dinner, and it was like interweaving our humanity and our need for diversion and fun and play with this very serious stuff.
Yes. Yeah. How long have you lived in Boulder, Colorado?
I've lived here since 2009, 15 years.
Why Boulder? And do you still think of Chicago?
Because I had friends here back in 2008 who asked me to come here and do a workshop on collapse. And so I did in 2009, and it was a very successful workshop. And when I came here, I was living temporarily in Vermont, and I came here and it was like I fell in love with the place. Absolutely fell in love. And I went back to Vermont to get my stuff and moved here in the fall of 2009. And yes, I miss Chicago because it's a very magical city. And of course, Andrew lives in a suburb of Chicago. So when we were writing the book, he'd make trips out here and we'd spend a weekend writing. I'd make a trip back there and we'd spend a weekend writing. And one of the things we often did was, after a day of writing, go to the symphony. And it just, I got a new hit of energy in Chicago, obviously very different when I was a girl at the age of 20, many, many years before that. So it was like, wow, this is the city that I love, and I'm here as an adult with so many of these things in the past that were grim and dark reminders. And now I'm appreciating this city from who I am today.
Fantastic.
Yeah.
I was born in Chicago.
Were you? Wow.
Carolyn, what year was it that you were 20 and you said no to your parents? I'm not coming back to Elkhart.
1965.
Goodness sakes. We left. I was born in downtown Chicago, and we lived in Long Beach, Indiana, right outside of Michigan City, right on Lake Michigan.
Okay.
And then in 64, we moved to Kentucky. So, wow. So during that moody time, goodness, to think that you were walking the same streets as my parents. When I go back to Chicago, I can feel the presence, especially
Yes.
when I get around the Drake Hotel and then I walk over to Fourth Presbyterian Church where my parents were married.
Oh, I love Fourth Presbyterian. I used to go in there all the time.
What a space.
Yeah. And that was during that period of time where I've got to find some kind of spirituality that's more liberal, I keep the gay thing under wraps, but it's not fundamentalism, and it's beautiful and it's historical and it's magnificent.
And I, Carolyn, can breathe in this space.
Yes, exactly.
I can breathe in here.
Yeah. And at that time, it was across the street from the Playboy building.
I didn't know that.
Yeah.
Right on. Let's talk for a few minutes about the book, Confronting Christofascism.
Sure.
And the subtitle is Healing the Evangelical Wound. Let me read a little bit about it. Will democracy in America prevail, or will it be usurped by a confluence of fascism and evangelical Christianity? In this book, Carolyn Baker traces the history of this unholy alliance and invites those recovering from the influence of fundamentalist religions, as well as non-religious, seeking to preserve the democratic experiment, to excise the toxic influences of religious authoritarianism from politics and personal life. Talk to me about the genesis of that book. What's the response been and what's been the pushback? But what a subtitle. Well, what a title. Healing the Evangelical Wound. Some would say there's no wound to heal.
You and I know that there is. We know that for sure. 2022, I guess it was. I was seeing the masses of evangelicals gathering around Trump and supporting him and hanging on his every word. I began to be very fearful of what was going to happen before his term was ended and before he would possibly be reelected. Felt like I had to say, because so many people said to me, so many friends, how the hell can people who call themselves Christians support him? And it's sort of like something in me said, well, let me tell you how. So I sat down and wrote that book. Which I wanted it to be an explanation, or rather an answer to their question. How did this happen? And so I wanted to start with a little bit of history about the fundamentalist movement in America. Other people have done a much more exhaustive job than I did, but I didn't want it to be a big tome of, church history. I just wanted it to be, okay, this is what I saw. This is what I observed from the original beginnings of this. This is how it kind of came about. This is what I experienced when I was in it as a child. And this is what I see it's trying to do.
If you were on an elevator, let's say you're in Chicago and somebody says, oh, you're Carolyn Baker. What about that book, Confronting Christofascism? What's the elevator speech, if you will? And
I would say, well, what is about it? What do you know about it? Mm-hmm. I'd ask them first. And then I would say, I wrote it because I think this marriage of evangelical Christianity and right-wing politics is deadly and dangerous. And I wrote the book in part to warn people on the basis of my experience.
Carolyn, do you pray?
I meditate. I meditate twice a day. Could you
talk about that for a minute?
Sure. I meditate twice a day. I've been meditating. I'm using TM for 45 years, and it is very much a part of my life. I'm currently enrolled in a doctoral program in transformational leadership and coaching at Maharishi International University in Iowa, although I do everything online. It's a program where we study leadership and coaching, but we also look at how does that interface with my spiritual practice? What does my spiritual practice have anything to do with that? And it's just a very holistic, it's my spiritual path these days, putting all of this together.
What does it mean for you to listen to the divine?
Well, it does mean being present in my body, because my body is that temple they talk about in the Bible. It's the temple of the divine. So I listen to my body, and I also, as I go about my day and my life, I read the signals, as best I can. I observe, I listen, um, and I pay attention to my feelings. My feelings are very important in terms of listening. And I just kind of go about in the world as an explorer, trying not to assume anything, to be an observer and a learner and a student of events. How do we become a student of these times? How do we become students of our interactions with each other? Because I really feel that our time here on earth is a university. We're here to learn things and learn lessons. From time to time, we get exams. And, it's not about getting a grade. It's about, what did I learn? Who did I become while I was here? And who, if I return here for some reason in the future, who do I want to become then? When people see me coming, what do they want to think and feel?
Carolyn, what's it been like for you to own your eldership as a sage? Because you are that. What does that mean to you to own that and keep owning that?
Well, to keep honoring the aging process, which we're not supposed to do in this culture, and honoring that this time in my life is very precious. And boy, have I been feeling that in the last few years. This time in my life is very precious. And it is a time that is not honored by the culture. If you got any white hair, you're an old lady or you're an old man, and you don't really have anything to say to younger people. In fact, you should probably color your hair so people don't see that, and maybe have some cosmetic surgery so that people don't see your.
Can you feel and interpret and sense the vibe when you're up against that?
Oh, absolutely.
You're ordering a coffee or you're getting
Yeah,
inside of an Uber or
yeah,
you're doing
yeah.
whatever.
Yeah, absolutely. And so I try to come across with humor and lightness, and sometimes that helps. And then other times it's just, well, you're an old lady. So, but I own and take possession of my eldership, and I'm grateful for it. I'm grateful for what I've learned. And I'm realizing that there's a difference, as Michael Meade says, between being older and being an elder. Being older doesn't make you an elder, it just makes you old. Eldership is when you say, I have something to contribute in this culture, and I'm going to claim that. Doesn't mean I'm any better than anyone else, but I have some gifts as a result of my experience that I want to give to the world, and I'm not going to let anyone minimize that.
Carolyn, how have you dealt with the fear of being forgotten?
I will be. I will be, because I'm not my image. I'm not my ego, and I trust and assume that I will go on into some other life form, and that this life form is, it has a shelf life and it will expire. And maybe there'll be some remnants of things that people remember. And then, I go on and I'll do something else that will be remembered for a while and forgotten. And that's the way it is.
There's an afterlife?
I believe there's some kind of, I believe in eternity. So I believe that there's some kind of ongoing experience. I don't think, I'm not a scientific materialist. I don't think that when the body dies, that's it, because consciousness is eternal. And even if I don't have a body in which that consciousness inhabits, I have consciousness, and there's no beginning or end to consciousness.
Do you mind sharing your age?
I will be 80 in August.
Wow, you're young. Your spirit's young.
It feels that way.
It's
Yeah.
young. I've met a lot of 80-year-olds. I'm soon to be 66, but you're young. Do you think about your parents? I'm assuming they're both gone. Do you think about them much?
Yeah, I had a wonderful experience. I'm in coaching as well, and I had a wonderful experience with my coach a couple months ago before the holidays, and I was talking about how I absolutely dread the holidays and Christmas sucks, and I can't wait till December 26th. And so we dug deeper and deeper, and I said that I've got a picture of my dad, and I got a picture of my mom on the bookshelf in my living room. And sometimes I sit there and I just think, I really wish I could talk to you. I really want to hear your stories because I know that what happened to you guys was awful. And I really would like to hear that, you know, as your daughter and the coach in me would like to hear. And I said, I hate the holidays because it reminds me of, you know, I think about the miserable holidays we had when I was growing up, and the pain and suffering that was there because of their pain and suffering. And I began to talk about the great compassion that I feel toward my parents. And I said, given their experiences and their childhoods and their exposure to fundamentalist Christianity, there is no way that they could have done anything differently than they did. And for the first time in my life, I realized how much compassion I feel for my parents. And she probed some more. My coach, went deeper with me, and she said, what do you really want? And I said, I want them to know that I forgive them. She said, what difference would that make? Well, then they would know I'm not angry at them anymore. And she said, that would mean they'd have to forgive themselves, and they can't do that. And for the first time in my life, I realized they cannot forgive themselves, no matter how much information, no matter how much reality, that's not possible for them. And a huge weight lifted off of me. It's like, oh, wow. It doesn't make any difference if my parents knew that I'm not angry at them anymore. They couldn't forgive themselves. And that's not my job. So that's been a huge awakening for me. And as a result, I didn't find the holidays torturous this year. It's like, yeah, I don't go in stores and watch people put all this crap in their baskets and, spend money they don't have, but it wasn't like, oh, I hate this. I can't wait till this is over. Very different for me this year.
It was its own beautiful gift
It was.
to be freed from that.
Yeah.
Have you, since then, have you been able to feel that in your body? Like
Oh,
there's
yeah.
there's
Oh,
a
yeah.
lighter.
Yeah. And, particularly in my torso and then on my shoulders.
Yeah, yeah. So even in this polycrisis, gifts are given.
That's right.
Gifts are given.
And that's one reason I think we are called to go through it consciously, because if we're willing to face it consciously, I think there are many, many gifts on many levels for us, not just torture and suffering and dread.
Carolyn, anything else you want to tell us about emergence coaching, or did you just give us a wonderful example of one of the value of it, your experience of being on the other side?
Yeah, again, just to say in a couple of sentences,
Sure.
it's really about here we are in this pile of doom and kind of in the ashes. And, we can choose to stay there and go into complete despair, or we can ask ourselves the question, what does this crisis want from me? And then begin to do the inner work that it's asking us to do and the service that it's asking us to do.
What is this crisis asking from me? Wow, I think that, to me, that question houses and includes everything we've talked about. But what does it mean to be here? What does it require to stay here? What will likely happen if we leave here?
Right.
What will likely happen if we stay here? Well, listeners, I hope you've I know you've enjoyed this and been fed by this. You can learn much more about Carolyn Baker at carolynbaker.net. This has been a joy. If this is what it feels like to feel joy, I'm feeling it.
All right. It is.
All right. Because I've had an interesting relationship with joy and even the word happy. People say, well, are you happy? It's like, I don't really know where to begin to talk about that. What does that mean and whatever? But I'm feeling joy, and I'm feeling really grateful to have met you.
These are the kinds of connections that Collapse wants from us.
Thank you for saying yes to somebody that you had no idea who I was. So
I've learned that that's really a good policy.
that's fantastic.